Well, this has certainly been a real fun computer to get reconfigured to a point where I can actually use it. I spent the better part of today getting this system reconfigured. Several moments where I just about gave up and said to hell with this thing. A couple of moments where I thought it'd be best to just take a nice sledgehammer to it and be done with it. These OEM boxes back then, absolute pain in the ass. Too many configuration files to reinstall, too many things to set up, too many things that go wrong and have to be redone. Just makes things way too much fun. Not something for a newbie to tackle. Definitely not. Even for me, this was challenging. One of the things I forgot to point out in the last video, Compaq did something rather unique. The status lights for this thing is actually built into the power supply. That's a very strange and unique thing. The only system I can think of that I've ever seen that done with. The top light is the power. Middle light's the hard drive, and the bottom light is the LAN controller, which interestingly enough is solid right now. Earlier it would flash off and on, but now that I got the Ethernet controller installed and working, I guess it's decided to just stay on solid since there's a cable plugged into it. There's a grouping of fiber optic that runs to the front panel on this thing. Right there. See right there. It goes up to that front, and that's how you get light to the front of this thing. So, as you can see, I've got 95 reinstalled, and yes, I did have to reinstall it. I wasn't really planning on having to do that, but I did. I don't have the video driver working yet. The default Mach 64 driver, which I put the Mach 64 card in this thing, by the way, just for right now anyway. The built-in driver is not working properly, so it's running in 16-bit color, which actually surprisingly doesn't really look that bad in that Weezer video right there, built into the, or included with the original 95 CD. So the configuration utility, I found that and I downloaded it, and I spent probably about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours actually, trying to get that moved over to this system. You see, the drivers were not installed or were not configured or something for this system, and so the CD-ROM drive wasn't working. The Ethernet was working, but without the CD-ROM drive I wasn't able to install the TCP/IP protocol necessary to get this thing on the network. If I had been able to do that, this would have been a lot easier, but since I couldn't, it turned out to be a big pain in the ass. I ended up finding a clever way to do that with my Windows 10 machine with the USB floppy drive and a thumb drive, which Windows 98 floppy recognized as a hard drive, so I was able to figure out a way to extract the files necessary to 3 floppy disks and move it over to this, which ended up not working. A long story. So I ended up just creating the floppy disks on my makeshift Windows 98 DOS, whatever you want to call it, setup there on my Windows 10 machine. And once I got the configuration up and running, I ran it, booted off that floppy disk, and came up and said the configuration partition was corrupted. Do I want to repair it? And I said yes. And then that wiped out the Windows 98 or 95 installation that was on this hard drive. Didn't boot up into that anymore. If you recall in the last video, I showed that there was 2 partitions on this hard drive. Both of them were over 500 meg. And I thought this was a 1 gigabyte hard drive because of that, but it's actually a 540 meg hard drive. You see the CP3540 number right there. and I looked that up. This is indeed a 540 meg hard drive. So I have no idea how this thing had two 500 meg partitions on a 540 meg hard drive. Something got really screwed up there. And did notice that it does look like it was upgraded to Windows 95 from 3.1. There was a 3.1, Windows 3.1 and DOS uninstall files and things like that on there. But no matter, the setup system configuration utility, when it restored that configuration partition, it wiped that out. So that spent about another hour or so on that, trying to figure out what the hell happened, and figuring out within that hour that I could not just, well, let's see, I booted off the Windows 98 floppy. I checked to see if it recognized the partitions, and it said there wasn't any partitions detected. So I F-disked the drive and formatted it, and when I did that, it wiped out the partition for the configuration utility. So basically I had to start from scratch. Step one, get the configuration installed. I did that eventually an hour later, because I spent that time dicking with the battery backup for the CMOS, finding out that the battery backup wasn't working. And the reason was because, well, it was working, but it well, this jumper down here, you set it for replacement battery or default, which is the battery that was in it, which I removed. And every time I'd set it to the replacement battery setting, it would not post. And I was kind of thinking that because 4 fresh AA batteries put out 6 volts, that maybe 6 volts was a little bit too much for that. And after a while of dicking with it and having to reset the configuration and the date and stuff like that 3 or 4 times, messing with this thing, that turned out to be the case. And I figured out 4.5 volts was just about right to hold the CMOS setting, keep it booting. When I tried 3 volts, it just wasn't enough to hold the setting. So these batteries here are 1.25 volt, and which would equal 5 volts. But they're a little bit weak right now, so it's pushing about 4.33 volts. I measured it, and that's working just fine. So that's battery holder is velcroed in, so I can remove it easily. So I've already done like 2 or 3 times trying to figure that whole mess out. After I got the system, the initial configuration ran on this system, it suddenly recognized more RAM. This is actually 40 meg of RAM, not 16 meg. Originally it wasn't recognizing the onboard 8 meg of RAM. It was only detecting 16, but now it's recognizing 40 meg, which means these sticks are 8 meg sticks for a total of 32 here, and then the other 8, and that gives us the 40. So let's just put it this way, it's been a long day working on this thing. But Windows 95 actually had all the drivers necessary. It didn't detect everything right away. I had to manually select a couple things. In the course of all this fun fiasco, I also discovered that this AMD PCNet chip right here is also the SCSI controller. This is a combination Ethernet SCSI controller. Very interesting. So it's an AMD SCSI driver and an AMD Ethernet driver that has to be loaded, and it's all built into that one little chip, which presented a whole other world of problems trying to boot this thing off a 98 disk, because the 98 disk does not have, by default, the AMD SCSI controller driver. So I downloaded that. I found that actually off of Hiron's site, believe it or not. Found that they actually had the line to add to the config.sys file there. Downloaded that, copied it to the Windows 98 floppy, and then edited the 2 lines for start with Windows 98 CD or start with CD-ROM support. I added that line in there, And when I did that, it did recognize the hard drive and the CD-ROM. But once it tried to load the rest of the drivers, which are all Adaptec drivers, it just simply froze up. So I had to pull the floppy back out, re-edit it, and that time this time I added 2 lines. So start with Windows 98 CD, AMD ASCII only, I called it, and then start with CD-ROM support only, AMD ASCII only. And I created a separate, separate menu, and then the appropriate lines in the config file for that, which just had I think it was the himem.sys, and then the AMD PCNet driver, PCNet's PC SCSI ASCII, what do they call it, driver. And then I figured that the Adaptec driver, CD-ROM driver would probably work with this, and it did. So I added that to it, and it did work. So once I did that, it booted up. Windows 98 only detected the AMD SCSI controller on there. It installed the CD-ROM and hard drive, and then the Adaptec ASCII CD-ROM driver recognized the CD-ROM, and I was able to install Windows 95. This CD-ROM works perfectly fine. This is the exact same version it was installed on here, the 95 upgrade disk. So this is I'm not even sure that this is revision A, but it's a very early version, if nothing else, and I like this disk. But so anyway, that's the day's adventure of getting this system back up and working. Not something that I would care to ever do again, and of course it brought that up again. But I was just playing a little bit of this Weezer disc, and you can hear that speaker working there. Not the greatest sounding, but it works. This kind of reminds me of the very first time I installed Windows 95. This is exactly the way the video worked, because at that time I didn't quite understand that I needed a video driver. This camera actually makes 16-bit color look better than it does on the screen. It actually looks like 256 color in the camera, but it's definitely 16-bit color. You can see how jerky the video is there, but yeah, it's kind of reminds me of that first time I installed 95. So I got to find the driver for this video card that'll actually work with this thing. I don't know why this is yellowed out. I guess maybe it's because I don't have a mouse plugged into it, but everything else is here. You can see it sees the CD-ROM now. Compaq CD-ROM. Compaq PC actually recognizes it as a Compaq hard drive, even though it's actually made by Connor. And there's your SCSI control, AMD PCI SCSI, AMD PCNet, and this is the one that's built into 95. It didn't recognize this by default. I had to manually add this, and it does work, so that's good. And the interesting thing is it recognizes the onboard sound as a Windows sound system, Sound Blaster emulation, and then sound system compatible. And I haven't gone any further to see how that works, other than just to play that video. I mean, I just got this thing installed like a half hour ago, and I don't know why it's showing this thing plugged in. That's kind of unique. I don't understand that. I didn't even turn that on. But yeah, it's working right now. This was not fun at all. Welcome. Isn't that special? Where do you want to go today? High performance, yeah. But yeah, so far, at least it's up and running. So, I guess it's time to get this thing buttoned back up and start. I need to find the driver for that and start doing some testing on this thing. Some benchmarking and see how this thing performs. This is the CPU board that came out of that Compaq system, and you'll notice this has a 66 megahertz clock generator on it. Now I'm not sure if this is actually a clock crystal. It looks like a solid state chip, clock generator chip, not actually a crystal. The clock crystals are those silver can things, and there actually is a crystal inside of there that resonates at a certain frequency that's stamped on it. But this one is labeled 66 megahertz, whereas the one I put in the system, I can't really get a good shot of it, but it actually is a 60 megahertz. So that means that I suppose this board might not be the original board out of this system, or that originally shipped with this system, but there was a 60 megahertz chip in it. So kind of wondering if Compaq actually started shipping these systems overclocked just to give a little bit better performance. That's kind of interesting. And these little clock generators are present on the main system board as well. You can see one right there. There's also another one up here, and there's one specifically for the AMD Ethernet SCSI controller. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is that this board does have a Yamaha 262-M synthesizer chip, MIDI chip on it there. That's pretty common as well, so I shouldn't really have problems finding drivers for those if I look specifically for those chips. But yeah, there's really nothing on this board I can salvage. I might salvage the clock crystals, clock generators, and I don't know, maybe the ROM chips. I'm not really sure what use I would have for those. There is a flash ROM up here as well, but I'm not really sure what other use I'd have for this board, because there's really nothing on here that would be beneficial to take off. I could maybe take off the hold downs here for the ports, but I can maybe salvage that voltage regulator. But other than that, I mean, this board is, whatever's wrong with this board, it's not something I can fix, so that's too bad. But don't need to anymore, because this system is working great now. So I decided to throw this US robotics modem in this computer I had, if nothing else, to cover up the slot on the back there, because I didn't have an extra slot blank to fit there, at least not when it's easily accessible. So I'm not going to use the card, obviously, but it's, you know, it's in there. But yeah, I think this thing's ready to button up now. I've tested it and it's working fine, so it's time to button this old girl up.